The Dareth arrived on a Tuesday, which meant I was already behind on the manifest. Karath Neen is not a prestigious posting. It sits on a cold chunk of silicate at the far end of the Veth corridor, and its primary function is to move supply containers from one part of the outer rim to another, without anything catching fire. We had 6 humans on staff, a rotating roster of Mareth dock workers, and an atmospheric processor that made a sound every 11 minutes like a disappointed parent. The posting before mine was a step up. The one before that was 2 steps up. Karath Neen was the kind of assignment that happened to you after you told a senior logistics officer that his loading sequence was wrong, and then turned out to be right. I was the junior quartermaster. My name is Rena Voss. I moved containers. The Dareth were there for a trade negotiation, some arrangement between the outer rim brokers and the Dareth home fleet about grain derivatives and hull polymer synthesis. Nothing to do with me. My job was to make sure the delegation's transit provisions cleared customs, get them settled in the depot's guest wing, and stay out of the way while the senior staff handled the actual diplomacy. I was good at all 3. They arrived at 1600 hours with 11 delegates, 2 cargo handlers, and a portable broadcast unit. That last item I logged without comment. Some delegations brought it to record proceedings. Others brought it to send footage home. The Dareth, I would learn, used theirs the way some species use laughter, as a group bonding mechanism, usually at someone else's expense. The incident started around 1800, when one of the Dareth cargo handlers walked through the depot mess hall during prep. I was rehydrating field rations. This is not a glamorous process. You add water to a foil packet, wait 4 minutes, and then eat what emerges. It tastes fine. I have eaten field rations in 7 different atmospheric conditions, and I have no complaints. They are calorie-dense, gut-stable, and they keep for a decade without refrigeration. That is the point of them. The cargo handler stopped, stared, called 2 colleagues over. By 1820, 4 Dareth delegates had crowded the mess doorway, and one of them had the broadcast unit. I kept rehydrating. The Dareth communicate in layered vocalizations, most of which our translators catch on a 2-second delay. What I heard, with that delay, was, "Observe, they are softening dry matter with liquid. This is what they eat." Then a sound the translator tagged as collective amusement. Then, livestock feed. They travel the outer rim on livestock feed. The broadcast unit's indicator light was on. I finished my ration, logged the empty packet, and went back to the manifest. My supervisor, Depot Chief Heron, pulled me aside the next morning. He said the Dareth senior attaché had transmitted a clip, the mess hall footage, back to their home broadcast network. It was apparently popular. He said I should be aware, and that I should be diplomatic, and that the trade negotiation was important. I told him I was aware. He asked if I had anything to add. I said I would try not to eat in a visually offensive manner. He looked at me for a moment, then he went back to his office. Day 2 of the delegation was more of the same, elevated. The Dareth had clearly received positive feedback on their first clip, because they returned to the mess at both meal periods with the broadcast unit running. They narrated, they demonstrated, picking up an unrehydrated packet and squeezing it between 2 fingers, then holding it toward the camera with what the translator rendered as, "Observe the texture of despair." They asked me, on broadcast, what the nutritional profile was. I told them, accurately, because I knew it by memory from the intake certification. They translated the numbers to their home audience, with a kind of theatrical horror that suggested I had described something deeply troubling. I said the potassium content was actually quite good. They broadcast that too. One of the junior delegates, the translator told me later, referred to me on the home network as the human who defends the feed with numbers. I assumed this was not a compliment. I took it as a professional description and moved on. That evening, the Dareth held their ceremonial meal. They did not invite the human staff, which was standard practice for Dareth diplomatic ceremony, and not a slight. I processed 3 container manifests, recalibrated the atmospheric processor's timing sequence so it only sighed every 14 minutes, and ate another field ration in my quarters. Fortified grain mix with a dried vegetable component. Solid. At 2300, I got a forwarded message from Depot Medical. Dr. Sene Orvath, our chief medical officer, a calm Marath woman who had been on Karath 9 for 11 years and who I had never seen surprised by anything, had received her first call from the Dareth guest wing at 22:40. By midnight she had 4 more. By morning she had 11. I found out through official channels when the delegation's senior attaché, a Dareth named Vethkor Den, submitted a formal request to the depot administration at 0800. The request was routed to my desk because it was a provisioning matter. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, because I wanted to be sure I had the numbers right. 11 portions. Standard human field rations. Immediate requisition. Dietary accommodation for a duration of approximately 2 to 3 days, pending medical clearance of delegation's own provisions. What had happened, Dr. Orvath explained to me when I stopped by her office to confirm the order, was this. The Dareth had brought their own ceremonial provisions, a complex preparation of fermented grain compounds and protein concentrates, sealed in atmospheric containers calibrated for Dareth gut chemistry. What they had not accounted for was Karath Neen's ambient microbial profile. The depot sat at the intersection of 3 transit corridors and processed cargo from 40-odd species on a rotating basis. It had, over 30 years of operation, developed an atmospheric fingerprint that was, as Dr. Orvath put it, broadly unremarkable for humans and several other high-tolerance species. The Dareth, whose digestive biology had evolved in a comparatively sterile home system environment, were high tolerance for almost nothing. Their ceremonial provisions had not been compromised before transit. They had been compromised by the simple act of being opened in this room, in this atmosphere, where things lived that the Dareth immune system had simply never needed to consider. It was, she said, a known risk for first transit delegations from low-exposure systems. She had treatment protocols. They would be fine in 2 to 3 days. The human field rations, I told her, were inert, designed for stability across a wide atmospheric range, sealed until consumed. No ambient exposure risk. She said yes. That was why she had approved the requisition. I went back to my desk. The formal provisioning request was sitting in my queue. I processed it the same way I processed everything. Item count, storage location, transit documentation, signature field, 11 portions, fortified grain mix, dried vegetable component. I pulled them from Bay 4, logged the draw, updated the manifest, and had them delivered to the Dareth guest wing by 0930. I did not transmit any footage. I did not make a notation in the delivery record beyond the standard ones. I did not, when I handed the delivery confirmation to the senior attaché's logistics aide, a young Dareth who would not meet my eyes, say anything at all except the total calorie count and the recommended water ratio for rehydration. He wrote it down. Both numbers. The delegation departed 3 days later, medically cleared and quiet. The trade negotiation concluded with a provisional agreement, which I was told was a good outcome. Vethkor Den submitted a formal thank you to the depot administration for the accommodation. It was worded correctly and precisely, and did not mention the rations specifically. I processed the departure manifest, cleared their guest wing for the next rotation, and logged 11 empty foil packets as standard waste. Heron stopped by my desk that afternoon. He said the senior staff were pleased with how the situation had been handled. He said that diplomacy sometimes looked like logistics. I said I was glad it worked out. He said he had seen the broadcast clips, the ones from day 1 and day 2. I said I had heard they were popular. He stood there for a moment. Then he said, with what I recognized as deliberate neutrality, that the potassium content really was quite good. I told him the iron was also solid. He left. I went back to the manifest. Bay 4 was down 11 units. I put in a resupply order. Standard lead time, 4 days. I noted in the requisition that demand at Karath 9 had been higher than projected this quarter, and that I recommended adjusting the baseline allocation upward by 15% for the next supply cycle. It was, after all, a useful item to have on hand.